Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this panel, AI for Good, the Climate for Change. I'm glad that despite the late hour, you all are here. I'm delighted to have David and Marcus here with me today to talk about the intersection of two very broad but extremely important and critical themes in our world, trends in our world. One is AI, and the other is climate change. Um, we'll try and keep the conversation to a broader level and not get too technical. Um, but there are four broad themes that I thought I'll lay out for all of you that we'll try and cover during our 40 to 50 minute panel today. The first is we're going to talk about how AI will impact innovation and creativity, which I think, as Marcus, you've said, creativity is the one thing that differentiates humans from everyone else. So we'll talk about AI and creativity. We'll talk about AI and the impact it'll have on fundamental science, fundamental research. And the third piece that we'll talk about is the impact AI, positive and negative, might have on climate action. And finally, we'll end, hopefully, with a conversation around what all of this might mean for all of us, not just folks sitting on the stage, but really for all of you as well. So I'm going to get started right away. And Marcus, I want to get you in first. You've written about this in a book that I had the opportunity to read recently, The Creativity Code. And a particular sentence stood out to me, and so I'm going to use that. You ask, I think, will machines create artistic masterpieces of the kinds that Mozart and Shakespeare and Rembrandt have created, or closer to home in India, whether AI will create more artistic masterpieces than A.R. Rahman, Rabindranath Tagore, and M.F. Hussain. And so the question to you, to get us all warmed up, is can AI get more creative than humans?
Well, I think as you alluded to, most people feel creativity is a differentiator between artificial intelligence and being human, that being creative is an expression of our humanity. So I was interested in this book to explore AI is doing extraordinary things, but can it, pass that test of true creativity? And I was quite surprised, actually, that there are a lot of examples of things being not just copies of what we've seen before, because I think that's what most people feel is, well, if you give it data of the creativity in the past, all it's going to do is produce pastiche and more of the same. And that's not creativity. It's just understanding style and repeating it. And we've seen a lot of algorithms that are very good at copying style and, doing your portrait in the style of Picasso or Rembrandt. But that's not really very interesting creativity. So in the book, I wanted to see, well, yeah, but can you use data to actually go somewhere new? Which is, of course, what we do. I mean, there was a discussion last night about creativity, and it was interesting that creativity has this association of something appearing from nothing. And actually, that's, of course, never true. I mean, all our creativity emerges from all of the input and interests that the things we've read, the things we've listened to. So we're all a little bit like a machine learning process. We take all of the input of the novels we read, the music we listen to, and then we might do something innovative with that. So can AI learn to do the tricks? What are the tricks that we use to be creative? So that's, I think, was a fascinating challenge. And I think, we're calling this AI for good. And it was very important to me, actually, in my book to try and take an optimistic view about the impact of AI, because there's so much dystopia around AI, fueled by Hollywood. We never survive by the end of the movie. We're always wiped out. So I wanted to look and see, can AI be used as a positive tool for creativity? And I think the examples show that actually, what are the tools that we use? Very often we do things like break rules, and that leads us into transformation. We see deeper patterns that we've missed, and that leads to new innovation. Or maybe we combine ideas from two very different fields. Now, all of those things are things that AI actually can achieve. I think the most interesting one is transformation. How do you actually break out of somewhere that you've been into somewhere new? And there are some very interesting algorithms that I talk about in the book called generative adversarial networks. And they are tasked with taking the data of the past, understanding patterns in there, and then producing something new, but not so new that we are kind of repulsed by it. So it's got to play this interesting game, which becomes a game between two algorithms. One algorithm saying, okay, I'm going to try and break what I've seen. I'm going to do something which doesn't fit anything that I've seen before. I've learned all of the styles of art for the last 1,500 years, and I'm going to produce something which doesn't sit in the data space that I see. But it then is tasked, it can't go too far. So the other network, the discriminator, says, no, you're too close to something we already recognize. Or it says, no, actually, you've gone too far. They're never going to recognize this as something that's art. And so it's trying to find that sweet spot between something that's innovation, creative, but not so innovative it's not really something that resonates for us. So that there's some very interesting stories there where creativity is emerging.
More evolution, almost not so much revolution, if I may say.
Andrew,
David,
could I jump in with a story and then a follow-up question with your permission? So I was about 6 months ago playing around with ChatGPT, and I decided to ask it the following question. I said, please write me a poem that is a conversation between Bruce Springsteen and Queen Elizabeth and Albert Einstein and Jesus Christ. And I said, please make it an iambic pentameter. And ChatGPT instantaneously did a pretty good job at that. And not being a computer scientist, I then asked ChatGPT, how did you do that? And I said, I understand that what you're doing is searching the web for content and that you're doing a probabilistic assessment of different words that are out there. However, no one has ever asked for a poem between these four people before. There's no content out there like that. How did you do that? And what ChatGPT told me is, well, I understand what these individuals will say, and I was able to string these together. But if you don't mind, I wonder, Marcus, being a computer scientist, any other explanation to help us understand
or
this
to come
amazing technology and how it was able to be this creative?
Or to come up with a more creative poem.
Well, I think poetry is very interesting because it's quite short form. So, and very often poetry is quite gnomic. So I think, creativity is a very interesting thing because it's actually a dialogue between the creator and the person who is actually being exposed to the creation. And poetry, very often, you bring a lot of your own creativity to the reading of a poem. So I've done a lot of kind of Turing tests with poetry where audiences are very quickly conned by GPT producing very convincing sort of poetry. But just to say, actually, it's very interesting because large language models, there are different ways of doing this. And ChatGPT, on the experiments that I've done, is very good at poetry. So it picks up iambic pentameter, and it knows what the parameters of that are. And if you use some other large language models, and I've done some experiments with this, it gets iambic pentameter completely wrong. And so it's interesting that ChatGPT and the whole GPT machinery it's using what the words that you put in as a prompt. But one of the things, the transformer, which is the T, there's this new idea that was a surprise even to computer scientists that was so effective, which it says, okay, what are the important words in the previous thing that was in the prompt? And this is something called attention. And the idea that attention on particular things and weighting those in then the assessment of what probably will follow this has been actually a surprise about how effective it has been. But it actually is only still very good at short form. So if you ask it to write a whole Shakespeare play about these characters, you probably find that there's some interesting ones where a murder mystery was tried to be written with ChatGPT, and it's a spy novel, and there was a double agent, and it blew the information about the double agent within the first few pages, and you're like, you meant to hold that back because that was the big reveal, 2/3 in. So it's interesting that a lot of this technology has difficulty with time. It doesn't understand a sense of suspension and time. And that's one of the interesting things that I think it can do things locally, but it doesn't have a global sense. So a lot of things become boring after a short while. So that's why I think poets, you're under threat. but long-form novelists and non-fiction, they're safe at the moment.
And double agents.
Double
They're at
agents as
risk. But let me ask you this as a follow-up before we move to the fundamental research question. You've written about this, and I think a lot of times the question that gets asked in panels like this when you're talking about AI is, will AI match or surpass what you've called the human code, but let's say human capabilities? But my question is slightly different. My question is your sense that that's the right question? Or I think what a better question might be is, will AI enhance the human code?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely right, because I think this talk of the singularity, for example, is very unhelpful because it makes the whole discussion very one-dimensional. Will AI be better than us?
It's very adversarial, it's very like...
Well, it's also just intelligence and creativity is very multifaceted, multi-dimensional. And I think that's the point, that this is, that's the message I try to give in the book, is that this is a very wonderful new tool to help us to be more creative as humans. So, some people felt the camera might be a threat to visual art. No, it just gave us another tool to actually explore visual representation. And, some people use the camera well and some use it badly. And this is what's going to be interesting. Those who can use, the people who are very good at writing prompts. That's a new sort of poetry. Who can write something that will stimulate the algorithm to come up with something genuinely interesting? That's why, DALL-E and Midjourney producing visuals. I think there's a real new art form there, which is, how can I make it do something which is not just the Pope in Gucci, but something really stimulating visually? And there's a really interesting mix of genres there, the words being transformed into visuals. That's a new opportunity.
Yeah. Let me now move to the second piece that I want to get to, which is, how will AI shape fundamental research, fundamental science? And let me put in a couple of minutes of context here. So, in my own book, in The Great Tech Game, one of the things that I concluded after looking at several thousand years of history of how technology has shaped the winners and losers in our world, one of the conclusions I draw, at least in The Great Tech Game, what I've called The Great Tech Game, or the era that tech is determining our economic prosperity and our relative hierarchy in the world, economically and geopolitically, was that R&D, countries that are doing a lot of R&D, fundamental research, tend to also be amongst the winners in what I've called the Great Tech Game, right? And countries that are not, as a corollary, are often lagging behind, right? The ones who are not doing fundamental R&D. And climate, of course, is one of those areas where fundamental research and fundamental R&D is critical to whether we'll be able to solve some of the problems that so far we've not been able to solve. So the question for both of you on this front is, are there signs that AI will be able to help us solve fundamental problems that are plaguing large swaths of humanity, right? Not just, Silicon Valley or small sections of our world, but really the larger humanity. Are there signs that AI will help us solve fundamental problems that are plaguing a much larger section of our humanity and our world?
Well, this is one of the strands in the creativity code, because my own subject of mathematics, I believe we come up with new mathematics because of our creative side of our being a scientist. And so I was interested, will these new tools be helpful for me discovering new mathematical theorems? And I went actually to talk to DeepMind, who of course created this code AlphaGo to play Go. They've been very successful with a lot of things. And Demis Hassabis, who set up DeepMind, he said, I've got a whole floor here at DeepMind dedicated to what, my passion is fundamental research. I want to solve cancer. I want to solve quantum physics, molecular biology. So it's wonderful that he's got a whole team working on that. And I think they will win the Nobel Prize for breakthroughs they made in protein folding. Because protein folding was taking a lot of data about how proteins fold. And when they fold incorrectly, that triggers a lot of health problems in the brain, Alzheimer's, things like that. So understanding protein folding is going to be very important to understanding degenerative disease in the brain. And the breakthroughs they've made by using analysis of the data to date has pushed the field on just beyond what anyone believed was possible. So that's really, for me, one of the exciting things. And I compare this new tool a bit like Galileo having a telescope. Suddenly that new technology allowed us to do new science. We saw new things in the solar system we couldn't see with our naked eye. So this new technology is a telescope into the digital world, where our limitations of our embodiment mean that we can't assess the data in the way that an AI can, and it can see patterns in that data. And I think that's what I'm excited to hear about for climate change. What can we use this telescope into the digital world, into the data world, to reveal that might help us understand how to better manage climate, understand how to limit carbon emissions, so which is what your wonderful report is all about.
David, you want to tell us a little bit about the report as well?
Delighted. And so artificial intelligence can, broadly speaking, do three things with large data sets. It can predict, it can optimize, and it can simulate. And if you apply that framework, there's so many opportunities for using AI for good. And certainly one of them is in the climate change area. I mean, machine learning tools are already making a big difference in a number of different areas related to climate change mitigation. Machine learning tools are already being used in solar and wind farms to help predict the patterns in which they'll generate electricity and better integrate solar and wind patterns, solar and wind into electric grids. Machine learning tools are being used in the application of fertilizers that release greenhouse gases to optimize their use to minimize the use of greenhouse gases while increasing agricultural productivity. And that's just the beginning, I think, of what we can do with artificial intelligence when it comes to climate change. In our report, we talk about 6 different areas. I think one of the most exciting is materials innovation. So kind of similar to the protein folding point. So when Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, came up with the new version of the light bulb 150 years ago, he physically took dozens of different types of materials and ran electric charges through those materials to find out how much light and heat they would produce. Today we can simulate 1 million of those types of interactions using chemical structural constraints in a second. And that allows us to both down select more rapidly from different types of choices, like different types of filaments in a light bulb, but also even expand the universe of materials that we're testing into materials that may not already exist but could exist. And the opportunity for applying this type of innovation when it comes to, for example, battery chemistry and improving energy storage, I think is big. Passive safe nuclear plants, biomass, all kinds of areas can be improved with this type of technology.
So I think, and I went through that report, and as I was telling you earlier, also I love the fact that it's very specific sectors, power generation, manufacturing, that you find the most impactful applications that AI might find in helping solve some of the problems and hopefully reduce emissions. But let me play devil's advocate as well, right, for a second. So one of the biggest emerging complaints about AI and its impact on climate has been the impact that it might have on emissions more directly, right? And let me, for the benefit of all of us here, take us back to the Industrial Revolution for a second. When the Industrial Revolution starts over 200, 250 years ago, the emphasis or the values we're emphasizing at that time is scale and efficiency. So we build all these large factories and railways, and we forget that there's an environmental impact of all of these things. 200 years later, now we are sitting here on panels and in governments and at COP discussing how bad those energy choices now seem in retrospect. So the question now when it comes to AI, because AI is similarly being talked about as electricity and the Industrial Revolution and the steam engine, is, are we being cognizant of the energy choices here? Because AI, and let me give you a couple of facts, couple of data points. Because we are adopting, in the case of LLMs, this bigger is better attitude, one AI model is causing 626,000 pounds of emissions, which is 5 times of a American car's lifetime emissions. And similar such statistics are being thrown around to talk about the energy impact of these models, the energy impact of the data centers that we need to manage all the data that ultimately fuels these LLMs and our AI models and AI engines. What is the negative impact that we should be anticipating of these large LLMs and other AI engines we are building? And how can we mitigate some of this impact?
It's a very important question. Thank you for asking it. And I spent a lot of time this summer researching what's known about this question. So let me offer my thoughts and see if Mark thinks the same thing. So first, I think we are very cognizant of it, at least based upon my life. I think every speech I've given, every panel I've been on on climate change, whether or not it's about NII in the past 9 months, I've gotten this question. So I think this is very much a topic of conversation, which is a very good thing. The literature on this is not very good, I'd say. It's pretty weak, but based upon the literature that's out there, I think the current contribution of AI compute to greenhouse gas emissions is quite small. There's a Nature article, a peer-reviewed Nature article from 2022 that says that data centers overall globally are about 0.2% of global emissions, and that AI calculation is probably about a quarter of that. Now, since 2022, we've seen significant growth in AI use, and we're going to continue to see that. So the question, I think, looking forward is, how big are these emissions going to be? And my conclusion is anybody who gives you a confident estimate is making it up. And here's why. We know, or to a high degree of likelihood, that the use of artificial intelligence is going to increase exponentially in the years ahead. It'd be very surprising if that doesn't happen. At the same time, it's highly likely that the efficiency of the hardware being used is going to improve dramatically, if not exponentially. In fact, the statistic I saw is between 2015 and 2021, data center workload increased 260%. And during that same period, energy usage increased 10% in data centers. So we're already seeing improvements in the energy efficiency of the equipment. We're also seeing efficiency improvements in the software. And then we're also seeing, very importantly, that the hyperscalers who operate the biggest data centers in the world are actually the world's largest purchasers of renewable energy. So there's enormous uncertainty here. And how these curves interact is going to be very important. I think there is a risk, there is a big risk, or let me say there's a risk that the increase in greenhouse gas emissions associated with the use of AI could be significant. There's also a possibility it could go in the other direction as a result of efficiency improvements. I think we just don't know.
Yeah, it's
Marcus,
interesting.
do you have a sense?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I've discovered some new symmetrical objects, and I thought I would use them for good. They're abstract objects in multi-dimensional space. You can never see them. But I thought I would let people name them for a charity that I support in Guatemala. So I thought I could use them for good. And when these NFTs came along, I thought, oh, that's very good. I'll make an NFT that you can own of this object which only exists in my mind. But when I announced the idea for this, I got this massive backlash.
Good.
Some of them because of people just are nervous of NFTs and things like that, but a lot from scientists worried about the energy consumption. And there are a lot of artists who obviously are very, are very environmentally sensitive, who are using NFTs. And when they were shocked, there was a lot of scare about this, about, oh my gosh, we're actually burning the planet to make these things which are just, don't really exist at all. And I then did a lot of research, and there's so much misinformation about the energy use for, and we have to make a distinction here, which is about your renewables, because people get worried about energy use, but it's about carbon emissions. If the energy is coming from the sun, we have enough energy from the sun to do everything we want. We don't have to worry about energy. It's where the energy is coming from, and that's important. And to learn from your report that actually a lot of these data centers are very concerned about this too, and are using renewables, well then that, those renewables could be used for other things.
And I just want to jump in and I mean, I think this is a really important question, but I think it also is absolutely fundamental that we think about how do we use this technology for mitigating climate change. There are so many different applications, so many different ways we can do that. We can use it to improve the power sector, the transport sector, agriculture, so much more. And I think we need a dedicated effort making sure, for example, one of the things we recommend in our report is that every institution that has a role in climate mitigation should have an AI office or at least a senior advisor to the minister or the CEO on AI, because it's a transformational technology, and if you care about climate change mitigation, you should be paying attention to it and thinking about how can I use this to help reduce emissions of greenhouse gases.
No, that's right. And I was at COP last month, and there was a big session on this, right? How AI can be leveraged for climate action. So I think that conversation is starting to happen. More of it should happen. But I do think that the risks of the green AI piece, right? Whether we'll have a green AI wave or whether we'll have an ungreen AI wave has to be talked about and kept in mind. But let me now move to another risk, right? We're sitting in India. We're not sitting in Silicon Valley or London today. And from the perspective of a developing country like India, or the global south more broadly, there's another risk, right? So the panel session that we are doing today is AI for good, question mark. I'm going to add to that and say AI for good for who, right? So when R&D is getting done on these applications of AI or even the fundamental models, if you look at the facts, right now, this is largely being done in 2 or 3 very small centers of the world, right? And by a very few set of companies. Like you mentioned, DeepMind. So DeepMind wants to go into XYZ health problems. Those might or might not be the health problems that are plaguing, let's say, the developing world or India, right? So if diabetes is the biggest thing I'm worried about, is DeepMind sitting in London going to dedicate its AI research to diabetes or a different disease that's, let's say, more prevalent in London or Europe or the US, right? So the question to you is, both of you, is sitting from the vantage point that you are sitting at Columbia today, where you have a great climate school and obviously a lot of research being done. You've been in the US government before. You're again similarly sitting at a great university in the UK. So question is, are we seeing signs that AI will, again, much like some other technology in the past, be used for good, again, for certain parts of the world and certain segments of the population? Or are there signs that it will get more widely distributed and benefit a much larger part of the world?
Yes, there is a significant risk that this technology could increase inequality, both between countries and within countries.
So people are saying that there might be a second great divergence.
Yeah, partly for the reason you point to, which is just it's being developed in certain places. They'll use it for their own good, their own purposes. But also, this technology requires data sets and it requires skilled personnel. And unless the country or a municipality or a company has the ability to create those data sets and hire those people, it's not going to be used. So I think we have a big problem actually with the data sets residing in the developed world and inadequate data sets in the developing world. That requires a lot of attention.
Yeah, I think data is the new oil is the kind of classic statement, and I think who has that data at the moment? It's very much in a small number of companies who've collected it. So I think there is going to, regardless of AI, I think we're moving towards how can I own my own data. I'm prepared to lease it to you for use because these things only work if it has a large amount of data, and I want my data to be used for good, but I want to retain ownership of it in some way. So the idea of a data commons, I think, is something that we need to look towards, and that is on the agenda to try and produce models where I can use my data for good by not just the big tech companies using it, but if I want a smaller NGO to be exploiting it for good in wherever there is. So I think all of these new technologies have positives and negatives, and it's about us being empowered enough to make those decisions. I think AI has a great chance to be a great democratizer. It allows a lot. There is the possibility of access to these tools across the world, and so I think it's about producing that access, facilitating that access, such that small startups can innovate and exploit the data that they can have availability to. So I'm quite positive about provided we understand it and do it well.
Okay.
But that's why JLF is having all of these debates, because if we are empowered, we can understand how to guide the thing in a direction that can help us with climate change, help us understand how to use the data for a specific minority, rather than, the trouble with health data at the moment is that it's all about white men. And that's, even women are not generally in the data sets, and so often the medicine is only
Absolutely.
not tuned for that.
Correct.
But that's something that AI will be very good at, is tuning data specifically for specific populations.
Correct.
Could I just add quickly that one person on this stage has written a book on this topic, which I highly recommend to everybody in the audience, and that's you, Anirudh. So could I throw this question back at you? What do you think about this?
No, I think I gave my thinking on this away, right, in the question itself, that I think that, and I've written about this more recently, about the AI stack, right? The AI stack being a combination of what you mentioned, which is the data, the talent that can make use of that data to come up with useful models, etc. But then you need to have the hardware and the infrastructure, like the NVIDIA chips and the computing power, and then you have got to have great R&D setups to make sure that you're always at the cutting edge of finding the best applications for your respective populations. And then you've got to have, I would say, capital, right? Because none of this is a low capital game, right? Right now, OpenAI gets 10 or 13 billion from Microsoft. Anthropic gets 4 billion. Like, you're talking billions and billions of dollars, and capital itself, I think, is excluding a lot of countries and companies from playing this, what I've now started to call the great AI game, right? And I think that the signs are there that it might create actually a lot more economic divergence than convergence. While I want to hope that it's more democratizing, my sense from the measuring the metrics is that it's going the other way again. But I want to mention that, you mentioned data commons. I do think that if we manage to think about it creatively, there's ways to overcome this current trend of concentration of power and capital and skills in the AI game again, which is through the digital commons. So India, I don't know if the two of you are familiar, but I think many of us in India are now familiar with what is called the India stack, or the digital public infrastructure India has been building over the last decade, where one of the key core philosophies is that data should not be owned by just a few companies. And you want to have a digital commons, you want to have a data commons upon which entrepreneurs from anywhere should be able to come and build applications, right? But let me now move, in the interest of time, to our last segment before I open it up for Q&A, which is, what does all of this mean, right, for all of us, right? What does it mean from a jobs perspective? What does it mean from a skills perspective? What does it mean from a societal values perspective? One of the things that, David, you excluded purposely from your report was the impact AI will have on the broader societal forces that are in operation, right? So this is a broad question, but I want both of you to take a crack at it, and then we'll open it up, which is, what's your sense of what this means for people sitting in the audience in their daily lives? How should they be thinking about this, and maybe how should they be using it, right? So take a crack at any of it.
I think this is a debate about climate. So for me, one of the things that I'm always worrying about is I'm not sure what I'm doing, how it's having an impact on the environment. I don't have that information. I would love to have, for example, an app which takes all my data and tells me, look, if you just did this, you would reduce your carbon emissions by so much.
X%.
And that just seems so realizable, and a use of the technology to be able to collect my data. And that will also, I would be happy to use that data and submit it to a larger project to help us understand more globally how to reduce emissions from our behaviors. But for it to tell me, look, switching off the lights at night really is, don't worry about that. Much better to worry about your flight to India or whatever, or making NFTs or whatever it is. So I think that personally I feel would be very empowering for us. I don't know how many people feel they know how their lives impact on climate.
Let's take a quick poll. How many people would be interested in tracking their daily emissions?
Look at that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, I'm going to do that startup, I think.
I think there are already apps. Like, I'm also
Okay, sure.
I'm not going to mention names, but there are apps now out there that are trying to, of course, the authenticity and the ability to get the right data is still a concern, but
I'll talk about a piece of this that I'm involved in now, which is the impact of AI on educational institutions. And I'm on the faculty committee at Columbia trying to figure this out. And the fact is, I've given an assignment over the years in my course to write memos on certain topics, and ChatGPT does a pretty good job of writing this memo. It doesn't do an A job, but with a few queries, I can get ChatGPT to produce a C+, B- version of a memo in my course. And I think every educational institution in the world is trying to figure out what's the implication of this technology for learning. And I have some colleagues who are saying, I'm going to prohibit the use of ChatGPT in my course. It's not going to be allowed. My instinct is, one, that's unenforceable, and two, it's not a good idea. Because our students, when they get out into the working world, are going to be using large language models like ChatGPT. We need to integrate it into the curriculum. But on the other hand, there is a real problem, because if a student uses ChatGPT to come up with the first draft, he or she has not actually gone through the process of thinking and learning that is very informative. So I don't think there's any easy answer to this, but it's a really tough problem that every educational institution in the world needs to be thinking about.
I think
right
the
now.
nature of the exams will have to change, right? I think the questions you ask now will have to also change as professors and teachers.
ChatGPT is rubbish at maths, actually.
Is it?
Because using a statistical analysis is not a very good way, to predict what a maths answer is. So actually, it's not very analytic. So there are other AI tools which are good at maths.
Let me open it up to the audience. I know we have a few minutes left, so I'll try and take a few questions. Maybe the lady here first, and then I'll get to this side of the room as well.
Good evening. It was a very enlightening session, and it was good to hear. So my question is, we had a discussion around AI and its uses. So you just at the last we discussed that it can help us in checking the emission levels and etc. But can it on ground or on root level help in increasing the green cover globally?
Green cover?
Green cover.
Green, as in forest cover.
Yeah, forest cover, right?
Yes.
Sure.
Absolutely. In fact, AI tools are already being used for this. I think one of the really exciting developments right now in climate change is we have satellites that are looking at the Earth on a regular basis every day, drones and ground-based sensors. We have massive amounts of data, but without machine learning tools, we couldn't be processing that data. So for the first time right now, actually in Brazil, artificial intelligence tools along with satellites are being used for actually fighting deforestation. There's a lot more that can be done in this area with carbon markets in particular.
Okay, can I go to the gentleman there in the back? And then I'll come to the lady here after that. I like the creative use of the handkerchief. Just don't throw things at us.
In every revolution, some new kind of jobs emerge. So in AI revolution, what kind of jobs will be there?
Sure. There's a bunch of reports that have come out, I think, around that question about what kind of new jobs will get created because of AI and the kind of skill sets those jobs will require. They're on the web, but
yeah, I think
you take
this
a
is,
crack at it.
we've talked about the Industrial Revolution and the impact that had on climate. Of course, the Industrial Revolution had a similar impact on the sort of jobs that people did. But the interesting thing about the Industrial Revolution is that it impacted across a generation. But this revolution is much faster. So a job that exists today will not be there in 10 years. So, we're really facing this with our undergraduates in Oxford that, mathematicians might go on to become accountants. That's quite a common path. But actually, accountancy will not be a job in 10 years' time. There'll be very few accountants because AI is very, very good at doing that. But as with all of these technologies, new jobs emerge. So, there's the data curator. The curating of the data that gets given to an algorithm is an extremely important new job. And being able to know the sort of data and how to use it, that's a new kind of job. The prompter, somebody who can use these tools to really create something new by a prompt, that's a new kind of job. So I think with all of these things, it's and what we're going to need to do as educationalists in our universities is not just to teach a subject, but to teach people how to learn.
And how to think.
Yes.
Correct?
Yeah, how to think, but how to learn, because everyone's going to have to be retraining every 10 years because it's such a fast revolution.
Yeah. The
But
question
can
is...
I raise a question about whether what you just said about accountants, because I'm not sure that's right. So I recall reading a study of the expectations around accountancy when Excel spreadsheets were first released. And people said, this is the death of accountants because what they've been doing is calculating. And in fact, it has not led to that. What it's led to is as many accountants doing more sophisticated financial analyses than they did before. So do you think this is different? Or?
Yeah, I do think this is different because the one thing that felt that the accountant as a human was able to sniff where the errors were in data, and they was felt that that was something the Excel spreadsheet couldn't do. But machine learning is very good at that. It's very good at picking up the anomaly and the pattern. And so one of the key skills that an accountant had in being able to feel where the data was inaccurate in some ways. That is something that now AI is very good at.
Since we're sitting at JLF, will authors exist in 10 years?
Well, as I said, poets won't, but authors will. No, I mean, of course poets will. And actually, one of my things about AI for Good is this is a new collaborative tool. It's going to unleash new creativity for us. So, I've already seen interesting new dialogues emerging to create novels where it's a dialogue between an AI and a human. That's kind of exciting. And we want to understand the AI. It's a black box at the moment.
Correct.
Maybe these tools can be used.
There's a great novel I recommend by Ishiguro, if you want, Clara and the Sun, which is about AI.
Yes.
My one is that I like is Ian McEwan's Machines Like Me. So
that's right.
Those two great novels.
Both. I'm going to have to ask last question, but I've seen your enthusiastic waving, sir. So I'm going to ask two of these questions, and then we'll try and take both. But first her, and then you, sir.
Hi, I'm Mitali. I work with DAOs for climate change. So for most parts, I am not scared of AI apart from thinking that there's a huge data problem. I am scared for AI though. The reason I'm scared for AI is because, say sometime back, we saw Tay being developed by Microsoft, being on Twitter for 16 hours, becoming like an authoritarian chat box because of the data it had absorbed from people. And given that AI is so rapidly learning from the humans that are feeding it data, I want to talk a little bit about personal responsibility. What are responsibilities that both people involved with tech and who are training large language models and people, everyday citizens who are using LLMs, who are using chat boxes, AI, what should they be doing to ensure that AI is more ethical, more good?
Sure.
How can we build AI for good?
I think great question. We'll just quickly, sir, 20 seconds to ask your question, and then we'll have you guys close out.
Hello. Hi. This is a bit of a broad-ranging question. Because of the significant developments in the technology almost every week or every month, optimization, significant I mean to say, doesn't this question arise that there should be a kind of rationing system, graduated system for access to AI in some units for corporates as well as a digital public goods to be allowed to underserved humans, individuals, certain amount of AI access free of cost or something like that. That question I think has arisen because I'm aware of many things.
So you can take a crack at either of the two.
I'll go for number one.
Sure.
I'm very interested in DAOs and blockchain as a way of democratizing this whole technology. I think, unfortunately it's got rather a toxic name, blockchain, because of cryptocurrency. But I think what you're doing is a chance to actually destroy this kind of hierarchical structure in the way that companies operate. And what's interesting about us misleading things, there's an interesting story with AlphaGo that DeepMind developed. They gave it human games to train on, and it became wonderful. It beat Lee Sedol. But when they said, what would happen if we gave it no human games and we just let it generate its own games, synthetic data, it produced AlphaZero. AlphaZero was so much more powerful in 100 games, beat AlphaGo in every single game. So our human data, the way we played the game, had led the algorithm astray to play in a non-optimal way. If we let it use tabula rasa learning, it actually was much better.
David, you have the last word.
I think, yes, we should democratize access to this technology, absolutely. I think one thing we've seen in a number of controlled studies is that it helps raise the average, it helps bring the lowest performers up to average. It can be a tremendous benefit in that way, so 100% I think we should do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Marcus and David. This has been a fantastic, wide-ranging on. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.
Subscribe to One India channel and never miss an update.